Welcome to Envato Toots Plus Premium. This course is titled Creating Vector Art, and this lesson is a solid creative foundation. Now, as I explained in the previous video, the creative foundation and the basis for a well-executed vector design is to draw out what you need to build in vector form in analog form, meaning drawing is incorporated. So the piece of artwork we're going to create, the vector artwork we're going to create, is based off of this rough sketch. And I'm just calling this guy the Fire King for lack of a more creative term. And this is my rough sketch. This is okay. This captures the idea, the essence of what I want to do, but it's not tight enough to build from. There's still some guesswork. So before I place it into my vector drawing program, I'm going to redraw it and create what I call a refined sketch. And I end up with this. I improve some of the detailing on it. And that's one aspect. Always be art directing yourself at every stage. You're going to see that as I progress with this illustration in vector form. I'll go back to something that was seemingly done, but because I'm approaching it with fresh eyes, I'll see something I can improve on. So you always want to be doing that. That's a good creative habit to get into. So now that I have my refined sketch, I can place this into Illustrator and we can get going. So that's great. Once you have your refined sketch, you'll simply just place it into your drawing program like I've done here in Illustrator. And what I do is, instead of keeping it stark black, I tend to turn transparency on and set it to about 15 so it grays back. You want to be able to see it so that you can follow it like a roadmap with the building of your vector shapes, but you don't want it to impede the clarity of the actual vector path you're forming. It's just there to guide you. So I set the transparency so it's grayed out, put it on a layer on its own, and I lock that layer. The reason why I lock the layer is just so it won't shift or move as I'm building my vector artwork. And so now I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm ready to start creating my vector shapes. Now, I'm assuming that whoever's watching this, since it's a Toots Plus Premium, that you're familiar with Illustrator, meaning this isn't really a lesson that's going to teach you all the fundamental basics of vector creation, such as this is a pin tool, this is what the pin tool does. We're not really going to go over that. We're going to assume you know what the pin tool is and how it operates. But that said, that is the primary tool we're going to be using the most, is the pin tool, this one right here. I like to pull out all my tools like this, and I have them accessible. I find, at least for myself, out of sight, out of mind. So I like having them there so that I can access them a little faster. If you like using keyboard shortcuts, that's great. That's a great thing to do. That said, there's a lot of tools within Adobe Illustrator that, frankly, I just never use, such as this one, the lens flare tool. I completely think that tool is nothing but bloat. And frankly, I've yet to meet a designer who actually uses it. So you don't need it. All we're going to focus on is the pin tool, this one. We're going to use the convert anchor point tool, this one. We'll also be using the selection tools, either the selection tool or this one, the direct selection tool. Those will be used a lot. We'll also be using the ellipse tool. Basically, you want to draw a circle, we'll be using those tools. And in addition to these, the other tools we'll touch on as we get into colorizing and all that kind of stuff is the gradient tool, obviously. We'll also be using this palette, the Pathfinder palette, we'll be using all these functions, unite and minus and intersect. Those three functions on the Pathfinder palette will come into use a lot. You'll see a couple other palettes here that some of you might not have in Illustrator, and that is the PathScribe. This is a tool right here called the PathScribe tool. I'm going to be going over the plugins in the next video and kind of showing you how those work and why they're good to use. They just make building art a lot faster. But right now, we're going to focus on the fundamentals of getting started. Now that you have your refined sketch done, we're going to jump in and start building this. And the one thing I want you to keep in mind as you're building is what I call the clockwork method. And we're going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm talking about. And the clockwork method works like this. Actually, I should point out, under graphic styles, I like to build using these magenta lines. And so I have them set by default within my file. And I build on a layer called build layer. It's a good habit to get into to organize your file as you build. Therefore, it helps to get around a very complex illustration or design or layout. So it's a good creative habit to get into. So back to the clockwork method. The clockwork method is like a mental trick. It's how to look at any shape, such as this little whiff of flame here, and know where to place your points. Now on a shape like this, it's a given that anywhere you have a point is going to get a point. So we're just going to build this one. Now this is a pretty elementary shape, but this is what you see right now is what I would call a rough build. We have our anchor points where they should go, but the paths in between those anchor points aren't accurate. Now we're going to make them accurate, and this is where the plugin comes in. This is where PathScribe tool comes in. We're going to take that, and we're just simply going to pull and bend these shapes to match our drawing. And that's the beauty of this plugin, is it kind of turns your vector artwork into almost like you're molding clay. You're forming and shaping it to get it to the exact shape and feel you want it to be. And then once it's pulled into shape, you have your artwork. Now I'm pretty anal, so I'll go in and I'll really try to clean up these things. Now when I work, I like to use what are called smart guides. So if you go over an anchor point, it says you're on an anchor point. If you're over a path, it tells you you're on a path. Now to toggle smart guides on and off, it is Command U. So if you toggle that off, now you can go over a path, go over an anchor point, and it won't do that. And you'll want to be toggling smart guides on and off as you build, because sometimes it'll want to snap to things, and that can get annoying. So unfortunately, smart guides only allow you to customize the settings so much. I wish it gave you a little more control, because then I wouldn't ever turn them off. I'd leave them on all the time. But in this case, I just turned them off, so I'm going to turn them back on. And then you'll see as I work, I'll toggle between those settings, on and off as you build. It just depends what you're building, and if it's kind of getting in the way of you building, then you toggle it off. But it's going to help you to build too, so that's why you want to go back and forth. So this is that shape. Not too much to that shape. Not a whole lot to discern in terms of knowing where to place your anchor points, because frankly, this is a shape where all the anchor points fall on a corner, on a point. So those are the given. Those are easy to discern. Wherever there's a point gets an anchor point. So that's the easy one to discern. So the clockwork method really doesn't come into play there. But if we go down to this part of this flame, we're going to build that now. And we're going to start here. And when you do pull out anchor points, and now this is a good example. You see how it's snapping to certain settings? Those are smart guides. That's going to become somewhat annoying, so I'm going to toggle smart guides off right now. Then we'll start building. Then we don't have to worry about that. When you pull out, when you place a point and drag it out, you'll get these Bezier handles like this. It's a good habit to get into not to pull them out too far. Just pull them out enough that you make them accessible. Now, as we go along this curve here, you have to discern where should we put the next anchor point. Should we put one here, or should it go to the point? Now, the decision to know if it needs an anchor point in the middle here is one of math of sorts. It basically comes down to, is this distance you're spanning so great that it can't be made up of just 2 points? And in this case, I think we could get away with just 2. So we're not going to worry about putting one here. I don't think it's needed. But that said, I make screw ups too. So sometimes I've gone back and I go, you know, I really should have put a point in. So I'm sure you're going to see that happen. But in terms of discerning this shape, I don't think we need one there. Once again, a point gets a point. Now, as we're going up here on this one, if you look at this shape, the curve of this flame on the right-hand side, and you think of a clock in your mind, it would align with the right side of the clock right here. So to discern where to place an anchor point, you'd want to place it approximately 3 o'clock. So your next anchor point is going to go here. Then you follow up alongside the clock, and all of a sudden you're starting to bend and you come up to the point. Once again, I don't think this span of distance is too long that you need any kind of anchor point in between. So once again, the point gets a point. Now as it goes down here, you see the little oval. So as it bends down here, this is going to be like a 3 o'clock. Once again, pull out the Bezier curves just enough to have access to them. We'll put one down here, 6 o'clock. And once again, a point gets a point. Following along this side, this will hit at a 9 o'clock. Now as it comes down here, I think we can get away with only having the next point there. Comes up here, once again, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, point gets a point. Comes down here, we're going to put one here. That'd be like a 9 o'clock, 6, 9 again, 3, and a point gets a point. This distance isn't too far to span, so I think we can get away with one at 6 o'clock. This one here, if you think of it, I think this distance spanning, you could go like this, but I think you're going to run into some problems forming that shape. So I think that distance needs to be divided. So this would be like a 3 o'clock if you tilt the clock in your mind. And that's the other part of the clockwork method, is you align the clock with the movement of the shape. So this shape right here where I place the last anchor point is kind of going at an angle. So you'd want to position the clock in your mind at an angle to discern the spot, and that would be 3. Once again, a point gets a point. This comes down. Now you're back at 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6. I don't think this distance is too far to pull that off with 1 point. Same here. I think that's a pretty simple one. This one, I think we'd want to put one here. This is kind of angled, so but it lines with 9 o'clock. And we'll put the last one here and close the shape out. So this is the rough building for this flame shape here. So now, using the PathScribe tool in the VectorScribe plugin, we'll now go back in and we'll just start pulling and shaping. Now, I feel we're too kind of far out. I like to zoom in when I do this just because it just makes it go a little faster and it's easier. And I just start pulling and shaping to align my vector artwork with the underlying drawing. I've already figured out what the shapes I want them to be in the analog form. Now I'm just matching that in digital via my vector shapes and Bezier curves. And as you can see, as I pull these points out, some of these anchor points are not really breaking, but this one you can see, instead of being a smooth anchor point, it's now a corner. It has this sharp kind of point to it. We don't want that. We're going to fix those on the next phase. So almost look at it as you have to break it before you can fix it type of thing. It's a process. Now there's a setting on the plugin where you can tell it whenever you move these paths to form like this, whenever you do this, it won't break those anchor points, but it's a lot harder to control the form if you have that setting turned on, I found. So I just go with it this way. So you can see how this is already shaping up to be exactly shaped as we had the drawing. That's a good thing. We've kind of done all the work figuring that out ahead of time. So we're just forming our vector shapes, pushing and pulling using the PathScribe tool in the VectorScribe plugin. And I'm going to get into more detail in the next video specifically about each tool in the VectorScribe plugin, and how you can use them and what they can be used for. They're great. I use these plugins every day, and it makes building in Illustrator go so much faster, and it allows you to build with far more precision, and it's just so easy. It's anything that makes the creative process less of a hassle and more easy, and get you the precision and the craftsmanship you want in your art. That's a good thing. It's worth it. It's weight in gold, in my opinion. So I just continue to go around my shape. I tend to go counterclockwise for whatever reason. Doesn't really matter. It's good rather than bouncing all around, just to focus on each section and just move around the shape until you get everything tweaked just right. So this is closer now to, I just realized I forgot this little dude, so we're going to hurry up and add him in so he doesn't miss out on the party. And once again, I think this shape is easily accomplished with just 2 anchor points actually, and just adjusting the Bezier curves with the handles to get what you need. So there we go. We're going to zoom out just a little so you can see everything. There we go. So as you can see, this is now closer to the final shape of the vector art we're trying to achieve. I'm pretty anal, so I like going in and tweaking with stuff, but this is close. You can see how we're pushing it closer and closer to the final form we really want it to be, and that's the process. It's a creative process. You're never going to create it dead on correct the first time, so a process really helps to refine as you go, and that's kind of what we're doing. Our rough build was pretty rough. It just kind of put the anchor points in the correct neighborhood, but some of these might not be at the exact address they need to be, such as this one. I think we're going to have to play with that one a little bit, but we'll get there. Right now, you can see that these anchor points, some of them, are kind of broken. This one should be smooth. And what I mean by smooth is, let me zoom in on this so you can see it with more clarity. This handle should go straight through the anchor point and align. there's a tool in Illustrator right here called Convert Selected Anchor Point to Smooth. And when you select an anchor point like this and you click that, it'll fix it. There. Now it works the way it should. You know, it nice and elegantly flows through that anchor point into the next Bezier curve, and that's kind of what you want. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to select all the anchor points that should be smooth anchor points. These ones, all the ones you see me selecting here, these should all be smooth. We don't need to worry about these. Where there's a point, it gets a point, because those are corner anchor points. They're not smooth anchor points, such as this one. It's almost like a V, the way the handlebars are. And that's what you need to form the shape. But the other ones, you want them nice and elegantly transition from one side to the next, so it creates a nice, elegant, smooth shape. And so we have all those selected, and we're simply going to click the Convert Selected Anchor Points to Smooth. Now they're all fixed. Everything's the way it should be now. Now it's a matter of fine-tuning. And like I said just a little earlier, we try as hard as we can using the clockwork method to place our anchor points in the correct position. Now the clockwork method is going to get your anchor point to the right neighborhood, let's say, but maybe not the specific address you need to hit in terms of making your artwork as precise as possible. And I think that's kind of the case with this one. I think we're close, but I'm thinking it might be better if it was placed a little lower right here. And this is what I call prime point placement. We're looking for the prime location for that anchor point to exist in order to create the shape we need. And I think this is going to work a lot better to pull that off. I think that looks a lot better than what we had. So, and that's all we're going to do at this stage, is we're just going to kind of critique our own vector art at this point and go around the whole shape looking for areas. I think this one, it's looking kind of clunky, kind of flat, and that usually happens when you extend your handlebars out too far. If something's coming off flat and it's not an elegant curve, then it's almost a sure bet that your handlebars are extended too far. You're trying to get too much from one anchor point, in other words. And actually, the math behind that means it's doing that because you're trying to do too much with it. So the math is saying, look, you need to pull that back a little bit. So there, I think that looks a lot better. I think that looks pretty good at top. I think we're going to adjust this just a little bit. And that. As much as I'll try to walk you through everything I'm doing, sometimes if I'm not saying anything, just pay attention to what I'm doing. You'll learn just as much from watching as you do from me talking, maybe even more. Okay. Looks like we did pretty good on this one. This has come off a little flat, so we're going to pull that out a little bit. Once again, I think this would benefit from moving somebody called my office. This is a high production value video here. Thought for sure I turned that off, but apparently I didn't. Okay. So as you can see, I'm still noodling with this because it gets to a point where I'm creating artwork and I don't stop until it feels right. Now that's gonna sound kind of weird, but literally it's kind of like a feeling. It has to feel right before I know that shape is right, and that's kind of a hard thing to explain. It's part aesthetic, but it's more than that too. I just there now I this feels right. It looks good, but it just feels right too. So I think I'm done with that part, and we'll just keep moving along. This is kind of what I was saying in the very first video, that the creative process isn't always as step by step as a lot of people might like to think it is. I don't like using the term noodling because nothing I do is just based off a meaningless exploratory. Like, I always have a plan of attack when I work on creative projects. I don't just go, well, let's see what just kind of floats out there. I think that's a good way to not be very efficient with my creative time. So I tend to think through concepts, work out ideas, so that when I spend time building them, it's more about refinement and improving those ideas rather than trying to discover something that I haven't already figured out. So we're getting there. We're just continuing to make improvements. That's a good example of one that could move a little bit. So continuing to adjust our anchor points and shift them ever so slightly if we need to get them into their prime point location, and adjusting the Bezier handles to achieve the exact look and feel we want. That's another thing. Sometimes it's easier to pull away and then just bring it back in to get it where it needs to go. It's looking a little flat. Okay. I think we have everything now. So that is, in essence, the base vector artwork for the flames in the Fire King's head. And that's kind of how we're going to build all of our content, using the same methodology, taking advantage of the clockwork method to discern where to place those anchor points, then going in, refining those shapes and those pulling the handlebars and adjusting the Bezier curves ever so slightly to find the exact prime point placement of the anchor points, and to fine tune the elegance of your vector paths to make those curves nice and transition well through a shape, in order to match what you've already predetermined what you want to build based off of your refined sketch that you placed in. So that, in essence, is the solid creative foundation we're going to build everything on. In the next video, I'm going to show you specifically a little more about the plugins called Vector Scribe. I think you're going to love it, so check out that, and we'll get back here.